Hi, Lindsay. I will give you a minute to get yourself situated, but I will just say we do have a quorum, and I have just received a message from Ted saying he'll be running a little bit late and will join us when he is done talking with Sarah over there.
Great. Well, why don't we get started with introductions so Nora can get to know all of us. I'll just call names, and if you'll say your organization, if you're a voting member. Yeah, I guess that's all. So I'm Lindsay, she, her pronouns. I am the director of the Missisquoi River Basin Association, and I am the chair of this BWIC and a voting member. Dean.
Dean Pierce is member of the NRPC staff, and I help support the Basin Council and do CWISP activities.
Sarah Down.
Hi, I'm chair of the Enosburg Conservation Commission, voting member on the municipal representation.
Nora.
Hi, I'm Nora Brown. I'm the new Eco AmeriCorps member with NRPC.
And I'll add that Nora will be helping us with the minutes during these meetings and her tenure here. So thanks, Nora.
Dan.
Dan Seeley, Richburg, voting member.
Barry.
Morning, everyone. Barry Lamke with NRPC, voting member.
Cliff.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cliff Jenkins. I'm a new staff member at NRPC, project manager here. Happy to be here.
Kent.
Hi, Kent Henderson, Chair of the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain, Vice Chair of this council, and a voting member.
Lauren.
Hi, I'm Lauren Weston. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the district manager for the Franklin County Natural Resources Conservation District out of St. Albans, voting member.
Bridget.
Hi, I'm Bridget Butler. I'm the executive director for Friends of Northern Lake Champlain. I use she, her pronouns, not a voting member.
Pete.
Yes, Pete Benevento. I'm the president of the Lake Carmi Campus Association and vice president of the Franklin Watershed Committee. I am not a voting member.
Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the coordinator for the Franklin Watershed Committee, and I am also not a voting member.
Alaire.
Hi, I'm Alaire Diamond, the Restoration and Ecology Program Director at Vermont Land Trust, and I am a voting member.
And Jim, are you on? Okay. We'll call Ted out when he joins.
I think it's just his technology. This has happened before.
Yeah. Just didn't want to step on him if he was here. So our meeting protocol is just to go over them again in brief. We've done our introductions. Please, if you are able, change your name to indicate your organization, whether you're a voting member, your pronouns if desired. Please keep your camera on. Please be engaged in the meeting and use the hand raise function. We'll make sure to pay attention and call on folks that have their hands raised. For voting, you can either use the online hand raise or physically raise your hand. We will call out names so that all those voting get recorded. Yeah. Oh, and we'll read out anything in the comments. So feel free to write stuff in the comments, and we'll make sure to read those out so they also get recorded.
And I will just mention that Karen Bates, Watershed Coordinator, has also just joined the meeting. And I don't know if she's got her audio working, but she could possibly say hi as well when she gets a chance.
Hello.
We got some new faces on, Karen. So if you just want to give I mean, Dean just introduced you, but.
Oh, I see. Sorry. Karen Bates. I am the watershed planner for the Missisquoi River Basin and for DEC. And so providing technical assistance here.
Great. Well, thanks. Let's move on. Thanks, Dean, to the conflict of interest declarations. If anyone has a conflict they want to call out, that will be part of it. Lauren.
I have a project as part of the Franklin County.
Okay. It was a little choppy on my end. If it wasn't for anyone else, I apologize. But Lauren said she's got a project application in that will be discussed as part of this meeting.
Yeah, it was choppy for me also, so I don't know if there's a mic issue or what.
Any other conflicts that folks need to call out? All right. Any adjustments or review of, here's the agenda on screen. Thanks, Dean. Any adjustments that folks want to propose? If not, we'll move on to approving it. Okay, seeing none. I don't think we need a formal vote to approve, right, Dean?
We typically approve it.
Do we? Okay, then I will seek a motion to approve the agenda as it is on our screens. I've got, it looks like a motion from Sarah, a second from Barry. So voting members, all in favor of approving this agenda as written, indicate by raising your hand, or either digitally or in real life. I've got Kent, Lindsay, Sarah, Dan, Barry, Lauren, and Alaire. Okay, that's a quorum. Moving on to the minutes from last month or 2 months ago's meeting. Dean had sent these out. Hopefully folks got to look through them. As he mentioned in his write-up, there were some heavy things on that agenda, on that recorded during that meeting. So please note right now if there's any adjustments that need to be made that you noticed. And if there aren't any, we'll seek a motion to approve these minutes. Looks like Kent is motioning to approve. Is there a second? Sarah is seconding. Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes as they're written from our August 7th meeting? Raise hands. We've got Kent, Lindsay, Sarah, Dan, Barry, Lauren, and Alaire. All right. Meeting minutes are from August 7th are approved. Next up is public comment on things not related to the agenda. Anyone have anything they want to bring up that's not going to be discussed shortly? Seeing none.
Oh, there is a bit.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Barry.
Actually, I guess this is the appropriate place to put it. I just wanted to share that I am going to be retiring on November 8th, so this will be my last meeting. And it's been great to work with you all.
Well, congrats, Barry. We will miss you.
My apologies for not saying that before, Barry. I thought I would make it something at the end, but yes, we will be looking for a replacement, we've had some conversations in the office about finding someone to take over Barry's seat when he retires.
All right. Any budget adjustments? I think, Dean, you had noticed there weren't any, so.
And there are none.
Skate over that and move on to the application. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Dean.
Yeah, I will get things started. I was thinking, Lauren, also that things will be tossed over to you. You can share. I'll make sure that you are able to share when that time comes, if that is something that you would want to do. I'm just going to work at things at a high level until Lauren is done and we are starting to talk about the possible actions on this application. But there was a staff note in the packet, a kind of summary that I called the application at a glance. There were all of the materials from the application. And then there were some concluding language about recommendation. This is the only application. So when we receive a single application, the scoring process doesn't really mean much. since it's really meant to determine a ranking. So this project was ranked first of one. And really just very, very briefly before giving Lauren, this is a preliminary design. It's roughly a $50,000 or almost $51,000 request. It's slightly less than 1 kilogram of annual phosphorus reduction, and the future implementation costs would be on the order of somewhere between $90,000 and $150,000. Although I was reminded by Lauren in a recent meeting, yeah, these numbers are pretty speculative. It's hard to come up with meaningful numbers, and I know from experience with other projects recently, project construction proposals are coming in higher than people are expecting, and the annual operations and maintenance costs, that's another thing that's kind of a squishy number, is on the order of $2,300. The deliverables for this work, if it was funded, well, if it's part of the clean water process, would be a final design report. And there is the list of the milestones that DEC has identified for projects of this type. So, Lauren, do you have things that you would like to share? Because you should be able to if you want to.
Sure. So hi, everyone, again. This is a process-based restoration, 30% design, and a tributary to Lake Carmi. And it is a new project type to the district, and we're hoping to work with a consultant to determine what types of woody material intervention basically would help to improve water quality in the stream. Hey, Ted, we can all hear you. Thanks. To be very transparent, we did ask for quote or cost opinions from engineering firms before getting to our budget estimate. And we had one at about $8,000, and then we had three between $30,000 and $40,000. So we're not entirely sure what we're going to get for bids, which is why the budget's so high, because I wanted to allow for ridiculousness. Alaire, you might be able to speak to what's a reasonable amount of money for this type of project. It's a new project type for us. And I will also say we calculated the phosphorus estimate using the spreadsheet and not the FFI tool. So that could also be underestimating. But again, the FFI tool is very hard and complicated to use, and we would need an engineer to help us to use it for this project. And like Dean said, the estimated implementation costs and estimated O&M, like we just made up. There's no way to know. And so we were excited about this project. It's in the Lake Carmi watershed. There's a willing landowner. It could be a really good public facing project. It's on a public, not public, but it's a shared parcel by the Blackwoods Association. So there'd be many landowners being able to experience it, which could just get us some more goodwill in the Lake Carmi watershed. But actually, Alaire, if you want to just chime in, I would very much open any thoughts you might have on this type of project too.
Yeah, thanks. This is cool. It's fun to see like it coming into like, let's try to do process-based restoration in a more formal way and get funding for it. I mean, my process with these types of projects is like, they don't have a big design, like a super formal design component. But I'm curious like a little bit about where, like, what's the size of the stream and the size of the length of the reach? Because as you know, the projects that I've done and worked on are like pretty small streams. And so they really don't demand a lot of design. There's some, and obviously I have been doing a lot of the design work myself, or working with like talking to like Bob Hyams or something like that, to do that. So I would think that like the $8,000 would be more like in line, because I worry that like we as a community try to like end up overcomplicating and like overcharging for this type of stuff, which is really like pretty straightforward. But then on the other hand, when you get into bigger reaches, it's not. So yeah.
Yeah,
share a little more about it.
very small stream. It's about 200 feet that we're looking at right before it hits the lake. It's definitely a first order stream. And I think, yeah, we were also really thrown by some of the estimates. But also like some of the folks that are doing this work aren't necessarily on the pre-qualified QUISP list. So we didn't reach out to like a Bob Himes to get his opinion.
Yeah.
Ted.
Yeah. I was reading through that. I would agree with Hilaire that the 8,000 to 10,000 for design work for something this small is really appropriate. I got a grant, QUISP grant in the Willoughby area in Westmore for about, a half mile of stream, including a pond to be surveyed for an alternatives analysis for $10,000 through Fitzgerald. So that's the range I would expect to see for something like this, especially using PALs and BDAs.
I'll just, if it's appropriate, I'll say the low quote was also from Fitzgerald and the high quote was from some more expensive engineering firms. But again, you never know when you put the project out to bid what you're actually going to get.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like, oh, sorry, Ted. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, sometimes I've gone around and talked to people who have done designs and say, don't offer more than like say 12,000 or 15,000. Put some parameters on it.
Sure.
Yeah, and it also seems like these types of projects are like, they don't necessarily need to go through the whole like preliminary design, 60% final design. I mean, with the project that we were just a bunch of us were out at yesterday in Sheldon, that's been this like amazing kind of Missisquoi, Franklin County collaboration with a bunch of people in this group. That was 400 feet of stream. We all, Lindsay, Lauren, and I and Bridget and others have spent time on it. But the design was really just saying like, this is the reach. This is kind of, we walked it and we like decided on some places to put a bunch of structures and like put that into some basic plans. Really for the main purpose of the plans was for like getting the Army Corps of Engineers permit. Like you don't actually need, I don't think you really need like design plans to do a project like that, but you do need it for the permitting. So I guess like if you quantified all the hours and the time that we spent, it probably would be like maybe $8,000. I don't know. I think that makes sense. But then that got us to like really, I would say final design and permitting and like ready to go to implement. So I also am just like a little nervous about the idea of like a preliminary design and then do we have to go through like all these stages to get like final design? Can you just go to final design right now with this type of simpler project? And like if it was a bigger reach and there was like infrastructure around and it really required a little more actual engineering, like this does not require engineering that you need like an engineering background to do. Then that feels like a lot more worthy of like, yeah, we need to like actually get an engineer involved and like figure out some stuff. Like hydrology and like if something gets mobilized, is it going to block a bridge or that kind of thinking.
Yeah.
So I wonder about
I guess I just will add Stacy Pomeroy did ask for a hydraulic model to be created.
Yeah. Okay. Which is
for
cool.
this.
I mean, and that's pretty cool because then it'll just get having that kind of information for these kinds of projects just like I think elevates them to like helping us understand the impact. Getting the actual a more site specific phosphorus crediting memo, like that kind of thing, like based on the hydraulic model. I think that'll all be really helpful. So so that all just seems really good. And again, like that less than $10,000 feels like should be appropriate to get that stuff for like, and also have a final design that you can then just like move into implementation with.
Right. Yeah, Dean.
Yeah, I wasn't sure getting your attention, getting Lindsay's. I didn't know if Karen would want to say anything about this issue of if enough work is done as part of preliminary, issuing a ID for essentially, 90% through implementation, because that sort of thing has, I think, come up at least once. And maybe
Yeah, I'm happy to work with you guys. This is a new project type. And so if it turns out that you've got enough information that Stacy's like, yeah, go for implementation with just, a few tweaks, then I'm happy to turn this project into final. Actually, what would happen, I think, yeah, at any rate, we'd make it happen. So the next stage could be implementation if that's how what you end up at the end with the outcomes of this project.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're talking about this specific project, but I think this like breaking open the thing of the model of like preliminary design, 60%, 90% implementation for different kinds of projects is really important that we like don't keep ourselves tied to that. So I know like I'm not alone in thinking this, but like just want to keep on advocating for like what actually makes sense. I'm doing a culvert replacement project in another watershed and getting QUISP funding for that. And it's like the original thing was like all the way to final design. It's a culvert on a private road driveway. Does not need to go through like months and months of different approvals and different scopes and different budgeting and all that stuff. It's like get the design and then just do it. If we weren't going through the QUISP, we would just do it. And had the money. So I think like that's just important, like thinking that kind of thinking. So Karen, thank you for like supporting that. And Keith and the Winooski is also supporting that kind of processing just to get work done. Like we want to get work done.
Yeah, so that's kind of all I have. I know with the numbers the way they are now, super attractive, but I think like from a phosphorus cost standpoint, but like I really won't know what the cost is until I get formal bids back.
Also, like you
really
won't know the phosphorus until you get the work done. Like I think that's like important for us all to recognize. Like, okay, you have a number here. Yeah, like it's like we should all like expect it to change. Like there's no way that without doing anything, how much phosphorus this is gonna mean. Like that's obviously the point of doing this work, the modeling work that you're proposing.
Yep. Agreed.
Hopefully it'll be more higher than the number you had. That'd be great.
Right. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? Cool. Back to you, Dean.
Okay.
Sorry, Lindsay. I'm taking your job.
Well, I have a couple more slides. We, as a QUISP, are looking at the numbers that came in, and I'm really heartened to hear the conversation about a consensus on the lower cost estimate. Lauren and I had talked a little bit, and I did know that she had solicited cost input. And I can, but we didn't get so much detail from the standpoint of like which firms, and it was Fitzgerald that had the low. But working with just the numbers as they were included in the application, the picture is not particularly rosy. So I'm going to show you some slides that reflect the application, but I've also got a spreadsheet that I just opened a few minutes ago where I may be able to plug in some numbers and give a better improved picture. This is something that I think you've seen before. The thing that the clean water service providers are supposed to do is to give money for projects, and we're using funding that was distributed based on a formula, and that formula had some essentially assumptions about what projects would cost to complete. So, $50,000, we're hearing that number is high, so that's good. So we could perhaps dial that down. We have also customarily asked for people to make their best guess of what the implementation costs would be, and I've made it my practice to just pick the midpoint to try to inform the discussion. So we're looking at a really super high cost per kilogram with those original numbers. I wanted to just recap for people, we've had some of this information before, the context for what is an acceptable cost effectiveness ratio. The Clean Water Service Provider, NRPC, in its role as the Clean Water Service Provider, we have not set a single number as the cap. That's something that some basin councils are moving towards. We've taken this view that, well, you know, we're looking at orders of magnitude and every project's different, but we've looked at a range of between 2 and 3 times the average cost effectiveness as DEC used it in this formula. It tells us what the outer limits would be of what we might fund or recommend funding. And we also just kind of assume that, okay, we're giving this money or would give money for a project and that we're going to get that phosphorus credit. We won't have to split it with anybody. So, and I apologize, bear with me if you can. There was a report done many years ago now that had a table in it. You don't really have to see the small numbers. What I've called out are the numbers for the floodplain river restoration figure. And I don't think process-based restoration was necessarily a big part of the database. So if those projects end up being less expensive on average, it's not really reflected in this. But the kind of benchmark cost for this general type of project, sort of in the neighborhood, is $16,500 ish. So if we look at this idea of, okay, we take that number and somewhere between 2 and 3 times is what we would want to not go beyond, then the cost that we could see ultimately for a project would be somewhere between $33,000 and $50,000. Now, when we were looking at an application that proposed $50,000 in design costs and then another, 100 plus potentially for construction, it just blows things out of the water. But that's where things stood with the numbers that we had. But hopefully people are just following along that, okay, we said, for rough approximation of what is acceptable, 2 to 3 times this benchmark cost. And in this case, the benchmark cost is roughly $16,600. We couldn't go, we could not go beyond $50,000 a kilogram, but that doesn't mean that we would really want to. But that was just what we were working with at the time. Any questions at the moment? Because I got one more slide that's going to be maybe where the rubber meets the road. So, what we and we've had some conversations in the office about this. Like if this project really were to end up costing the complete costs around just $50,000, and I know that $50,000 is for design at this point. Our take is that that's really costly, and it makes the funding of implementation basically a non-starter without some kind of big phosphorus increase. And we would have to, as a clean water service provider, be confident that we're going to not have to split the phosphorus credits for it with anybody. So $50,000, the requested amount, is a scary number. And not an attractive number. And there's really no difference between the $50,000 requested and the 3 times that's basically the same situation. If we were looking at the 2 times the benchmark cost, that's still an expensive project. And from our perspective as the clean water service provider, it still hinges on the clean water service provider getting the full phosphorus credit. But we also recognize that DEC has been talking about essentially creating an inflation factor for those benchmark costs. So if we, or yeah, if or when we get those, that could change the picture, but it hasn't done that yet. So it wouldn't really leave room for us to provide implementation funding. And we really don't want to fund many design projects where we're not going to get the implementation funding. But then something like 16,000, if it's only, yeah, I say if it's a roughly 1 kilogram reduction, that's an easy thing to recommend. And it leaves room for funding of some portion, at least, of implementation. One of the things that's really tricky about the world that we're in is that if somebody came to us and said, oh, okay, if the QUIS won't fund all of this, what if I went to another program? And Lauren and I have kicked this around a little bit. Unfortunately, if you're getting funding from DEC or the Basin program, those are going to be situations, as near as we can tell, where the phosphorus credit would be split based on the amount of funding. And that's where we're in a spot. And although, maybe in theory, the clean water service provider could say, well, we're giving you this money with the expectation that we aren't splitting the phosphorus credit with anybody. But I don't, I think that's going to tie the hands of an applicant. And so they may end up walking away. This is just, it's very difficult. So to boil all of this down, I'm just simply going to say that something on the order of the request is really a high number. Now, it's sounding like, based on the conversation today, that the request could conceivably be amended down and pretty substantially. And I guess it may be that that's where some of the conversation needs to start. And I see that Lauren's got her hand up, and I think I've maybe said enough for now, and you can just take things from here.
I think this is the whole issue with the order of operations for grants, in that you need a cost opinion to write the grant, but then you need to do a formal request for bids afterwards, and you don't know who's going to be available. And so it just doesn't make sense the way any of this is structured.
Yeah. And and when you say order of operations, I get what you're saying. And maybe I could have done a better job with the order of agenda items, because an agenda item that we will be taking up later in this meeting is the DEC proposal to relax the procurement requirements. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at that part of the agenda, but in the near future, and we'll get into this more a little bit later, there will not be a DEC requirement for 3 proposals. So, I don't know that in the end it changes the conversation about this specific project, because your application is in now, it is what it is. But in the future, there's not going to be a DEC requirement. Now we'll have to amend master agreements, and you'll have to follow your own, every subgrantee will have to follow its own procurement policies. So if your own procurement policy said you competitively select over a certain amount, well, then you're going to maybe have to change that procurement policy when using QUISP funds if that number's too low. But anyway, I just wanted to touch base on that, because it's a requirement for now, but it might not be in the future.
Right, but I guess my point is, with the WIC, rather I ask for how much I might need now, or would you rather me get approval for a lower cost now and then come back to you in a month and ask for more money? It's like, I don't have an answer regardless. And if I had only asked the expensive firms, there would be no context for a cheaper price at all. So I guess, granted, that's my project, I might hop off my pedestal, but if others want to speak up, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, Ted, go ahead.
Yay. all I gotta say is DEC's finally listening to us, and I've been through a couple of listening sessions with them, and this is something we've emphatically said. We already have procurement policies within our organization to get. We already do kind of a bidding to get what is going to be the most cost effective for either design or implementation before we even put the funding package together. So yeah, this is finally putting the horse before the cart in some ways, which I'm really happy to hear, Dean, because I haven't heard it from the Memphremagog watershed, but I imagine it's coming down the line on Friday when I do another book meeting. So thank you, Lauren, for iterating something that's been really driving me nuts. And I'm glad, Dean, to hear this. And I finally found the highlighted section in the document that shows this. So hurrah.
Alaire, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a bunch of thoughts. I mean, the first is just around just like and I share, you know, that happiness, Ted. That's great that we don't need to do that procurement piece anymore. We won't need to. But I think that it's just like interesting the back and forth that like we have as project managers, the nonprofits and or the agencies that are doing these projects, and then the private engineers, contractors, consultants that we work with. Like I've had multiple times where I have gotten a quote from like one person and like written the grant for that and gotten that, and then had to put it out to bid, and that it's like as a lower amount and just said that like this is the max of what I have. And so what's going to happen is either those other contractors are going to say like, cool, I'm not going to put in a bid because it's too low, or they will and they'll just make it work. So there's definitely like a back and forth, and I'm really sensitive to this particular type of work. It's not something that a lot of our engineering and implementation community, the contracting and consulting community is really that familiar with right now. And so I do not want it to become a thing where like I can't even imagine that what you're describing being $170,000. Like that's just it just makes me like, what world are we in right now? Like it would literally like Dean, you're like 16,000 or whatever. I could see that being the entire thing, like the design and the implementation, and maybe working with some volunteers. Maybe it's a bit more if you're truly like paying for everything that we've often just done with volunteers or like our own staff time. But you know, these are small, like simple projects. I think the analysis required to get a really good phosphorus number is really important. But like they're not like they're not design projects that are like super complicated. That's the whole point of them, is that they're not that complicated. We want to be able to like replicate these across the landscape and not have it be like we are not going to ever do it if they're $170,000 for 200 feet. That's just a non-starter. So I'm just like reflecting a little bit on like the back and forth between, you know, I think those numbers, Dean, that you threw up there that were like, this is the cost for this kilogram of phosphorus and this type of project. Like those are numbers we could totally just share with the community of contractors and be like, this is what we got. We got 16,000 or whatever. And that's what we have. And if you want to bid on it, go for it. But like, no, you can't just go and say that's got $30,000 for initial design. Like that doesn't make any sense, because I think that just reflects that they don't know that much about these kind of projects, honestly, because they're kind of new. And I think we need to like build them like realistic expectations of like what these actually are from the start. Otherwise, we're never gonna move forward if they're that expensive.
I'll just toss in, right, this is a new project type, like people might be afraid of it. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't try it. And maybe like we do really solidify these numbers of like, no, it really should cost X, Y, or Z. And then I think too, just like Alaire, one of your points was we could just use staff time. I just want to reiterate, like a lot of these organizations need the quiz money for the staff time to do these projects. And like for transparency, for this project, it's going to be a brand new project to all of my staff. So, like we did add in some time for us to learn some stuff too. And so, you know, maybe the next one will be cheaper because we won't need that time to figure out what the hell we're doing. And I think, again, it's like, do we like the project enough to do it even if it is expensive? is kind of like where I'm falling. And so maybe there needs to be like some contingency written into the QUISP grants of like, we think it should cost this, and if you get bids way higher than this, it needs to go back to the WIC or something. I don't know. It just feels like, yeah, I'd love Evan to bid on it, but why did 3 other engineering firms say it would cost $30,000 to $40,000? You know, and like, do we need to? Sorry, that's all I got.
If I can, sorry, if I can just jump in, Lindsay. I mean, I'll offer a kind of unvarnished opinion, and that is the engineers are super busy, and they can do, you know, if it's a civil environmental engineering firm, they are super busy. And they don't have to be, you know, sharpening their pencil, so to speak.
I want to speak to some of the things I heard Alaire and Lauren say, and just sort of maybe reiterate. But I'm very nervous about this sort of supposed to be simple project becoming something that we then have to jump through all these hoops to get done. You know, we don't need, as Alaire stated, we don't need more engineering heavy work. We already don't have, as Dean just said, the capacity with our engineers to get all of those projects off the ground quickly. So I hope that we can figure out a way to fund these projects. Hopefully they're cheap, but but that we can do them just so we can move projects forward without having to wait for 1 year of preliminary design, 1 year of final design. We're talking 7 years out before we get some wood put into a stream. That's not anybody's goal. Karen.
I think that these types of projects are going to benefit from the fact that the Rivers program wants them to happen, and we all want them to happen. And we have so I think together we're going in the same direction. You know, there are other projects where it's like, you know, the gully stabilization, let's just put it out there, where it's like, we never meant for a lot of money to be directed towards gully stabilization. So that's where it's sort of like, okay, so what does this mean? And it's just like, it's unclear as to what that project type is and how it fits. But we already have a Rivers program that's behind process-based restoration, that's low tech. And we also see it as you know, as an agency, as a low cost effort. So in terms of being fearful that down the road there's going to be more expenses, it's going to be more complicated, that's all going to be reduced because of the fact that we're trying to make this work, and our vision is a low cost, low tech process. Of course, we can't do anything about archaeology, but the other stuff at least, and hoping to reduce the amount of phases where design's needed, for example, could be reduced.
Alaire?
Yeah, or like, I guess just to jump off that, Karen, like reduce the number of phases where design is needed by an engineer who there's only a very limited number of them, and they can charge more because they, you know, but I would say with these kinds of projects, you really don't need an engineer to do the design. You need the engineer to do the hydraulic analysis and figure out the phosphorus stuff. Like, so I'm almost curious, like, Lauren, your staff could totally design this project. Like, if it's what you're describing, they could totally do it. Like, they are learning. We had an amazing day yesterday. Could they do the design and then bring in the engineer where they're absolutely critical? And then just pay for them to do that, pay for staff time to do all the other work. I think that seems like it would end up being a much more like affordable project, and also just happen faster, because then you could just like unleash people to do these kinds of things, and then they're backed up by the engineering. I'm sorry to like get in and like start to like question the proposal, but like this is just like an interesting conversation, and it makes me just question a bunch of things and assumptions that, you know, we might all have about how these can proceed.
And I'll just add that if Stacy's okay with it, I'm okay with it.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just say we had a couple back and forths with Stacy about this exact project. And she specifically said in the scope of work, there should be a basic hydraulic model to be able to determine at what flow events and how much floodplain to be able to restore. Wanting to get answers about confirming that floodplain connections would not impact other parcels, floodplain connections would transition smoothly to downstream. There is a little bit of infrastructure in the area, and how would these projects become self-sustaining over time? And like, yes, to an extent, Larry, I agree my staff could do some of this, but like those all feel like someone with an engineering license should have to do. So it's kind of like we're being pushed towards this, we're being strongly encouraged towards this more expensive scope of work while we're still figuring out the answers to some of these questions for these projects that are funded by the state. So that's my 2 cents there.
Any other discussion points or questions? Go ahead, Dean.
Lauren, maybe I missed this, but could you address the time sensitivity, if there is one, for getting some action taken by the WIC today versus possibly at another meeting?
Go ahead, Lauren.
Sorry, my internet's a little weird today. Time sensitivity, I guess. There's not a huge rush, except if the WIC doesn't want to fund it, we should go apply for another grant, and those deadlines are coming up. And we'd love to not replicate work if we don't have to. Sorry, can you all hear me? Yeah, okay. It's very choppy on my end. And then I guess just like a bigger question is, how much autonomy do the WICs have to approve projects that aren't within the DEC recommendations or the QUIS recommendations? Like, almost to the point of like, why are we here if we don't get to pick projects we like?
Dean?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a stab at that. The WIC could approve a project that costs $300,000 a kilogram. It could, but that doesn't bind the clean water service provider to issue a task order for it, because it's the clean water service provider that has the contractual agreement with DEC. So, I mean, the WICs have autonomy, but you have to realize that when funding is approved for a project, if it was just like too expensive, the clean water service provider is going to say there's no way that we could justify signing a task order for that, because it's gonna blow apart the numbers just too much. So it goes back to DEC, and like I was saying earlier in my comments, that if DEC adjusted the benchmarks substantially, well, then it's on them. And the thing is that it has to be on them. I kind of feel some days that DEC almost wishes that the QUIS would stick their necks out, but we think it's DEC that should be sticking its necks out. And because if the state auditor is going to do an investigation and issue a report on clean water funding spending, we don't want to be the subject of that report.
Lauren?
So like, why are we here? At the end of the day, like, this almost feels like a waste of time if we just need to meet the cost effectiveness ratio for DEC. And I know that sounds mean, but like, I have lots of things to do, and if my opinion here doesn't even matter, it's hard to stomach. And maybe that's feedback for DEC, but it's hard to stomach. It's also hard to stomach, like, hey, go get all the projects, we can spend all this money. And like $30,000 is going to determine whether or not a good project with a willing landowner and a team who wants to do it gets funded. And Dean, I know, like, I love you, Dean, and I know you're fighting a good fight for us. And I'm exhausted.
Dean?
Yeah, I'll just say, well, I was ready to say something, but then you said 30,000. So I didn't know whether or not, are you mentally changing the budget?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm not.
Okay. I wanted to,
yeah.
I wanted to be sure of that. Yeah, I mean, I know that I'll address you specifically, Lauren, because I know that there are things about this that frustrate you. And I think the frustrations get even more intense when there's the first of something or something is new. And as we've been talking about today, this is a, kind of new project type. And so we have to work through things until DEC finds like its comfort zone for what it's going to require for projects. And out of the gate, we have a certain expectations that we have to meet, but then maybe later on it won't be the same and it'll make it more acceptable. But I want to try to find a way. I mean, again, if the WIC makes a recommendation for $50,000, and I have heard things said today that give me the distinct impression that what this cost ultimately is going to be for the design piece, at least, is going to be lower, then I'm going to keep that in mind before we sign any task award. That's just a reality. And I think if there was a way for the BWIC to get a bit more information and the dust to settle perhaps a little bit with more freedom in terms of getting engaging a consultant, that things will be a little bit better. But I understand you've got the pressure of the other grant sources and there's the promise of all of this funding. And I know it's a lot of funding, but there are just so many hoops. I get it. I'll stop talking.
Hilaire?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds, Lauren, like you are pretty sure. I mean, if Fitzgerald is able to do this, like it's not a $50,000 project. It's what would it be? 18,000 or something like that? Like with
Or
your staff
less, yeah.
Yeah. So like I think that's like important here. Like, are you like that is ultimately like what it probably will be, what it maybe should be. That makes sense, I think, to a lot of us. That's in line with the numbers that you shared, Dean. And yeah, I mean, I just wonder about like, are you willing to like be like yeah, this is like, let's make it a $20,000 request and like know that like and then you could at least like move forward. And if like nobody's willing to do it for like within that budget, then maybe come back for more money or something like that. But it sounds like that's actually what you think it's going to be and hoping it will be, and what it kind of should be. And I think like maybe there's a little bit of leeway with this request, honoring the fact that like you are doing this like first of its kind project and it is requiring more staff time for you and your staff. And all of us like learning, and like they're like that costs money, like you're kind of taking that on for like the rest of us, which is awesome. So yeah, like there could be a little cushioning in there for that. I mean, I would love to approve this the project itself, in a way that like doesn't set us up for then like thinking that preliminary design for wood addition is going to be $50,000 every time. Like I just don't want to like set that, but I also want to like, it feels like there's something here that's like really obvious that we would support. And it's like, how do we like describe it or name it? Is my question here.
Barry?
And this project, if Lauren is willing to do that, could that budget be amended, or does it require a formal amendment or a formal revision and has to be put off to the next meeting?
I think that if the Basin Council decided that it was going to be, say, $20,000 for this this phase, whatever that phase is, then the project would have the BWQ's support for $20,000, and that it doesn't have to come back to the Basin Council. It would really just be implicit, or you could make it explicit, that before the task award is signed, that Lauren submits to the QUISP a new budget that's built around a $20,000 total.
Lauren?
I guess too, I just want to frame the particular challenge for the 30% design request for funding, given that the number we gave you for phosphorus estimate, that is the baseline of this entire conversation of how many times the standard cost effectiveness ratio, is from a ridiculous spreadsheet and has had no engineering put behind it. And so I guess I just want to, like, the 30% design cost effectiveness step feels inherently flawed to me. So I'll just toss that out there too. We can resubmit a $20,000 design, and we can, when we put it out to bid, we say we have 15,000 for the consultant. Give us your best shot. Like, I'm happy to do that, so I don't have to write another grant. But I just think this is a bigger problem than just this one project, and would like, as a team that is proposing projects every time it opens up, like, can we do something different and have it clearer from the get-go? Because, like, the work that went into developing this project to get it to an application is unpaid time. I'll stop there.
Sarah?
Being not in the world here, but I think I'm on this board to be an outsider. So I'm looking at this from the last time we were talking about all the obstacles to have you all bring projects forward. And it sounds like we are putting up obstacles and we have money, that it seems like a no-brainer that we need to go forward if we can have partners. I just don't understand why we're putting so many obstacles there. As an outsider looking in, I'm looking at all your data, Dean, and I understand that, but if no one's coming in with projects, and we need projects, and we have the money, why are we not going forward?
Karen?
So does it make sense, if we know, because as Lauren says, all the numbers are based on a lot of fluff. We don't really know what they are, but generally we know natural resource projects are the best bang for your buck. So can we put that in there so that if let's say there is sort of a question, that the auditor comes in and says, why are all this funding, where is all this funding going? And that if there's some final definitive decision based on the fact that we don't know what the ratio is really, and natural resource projects are the better bet. And we can even look at all the natural resource projects and floodplain restoration projects that we have in our queue right now for QUISP across the state. And generally, they're better funding, phosphorus reduction per dollar. So if you need that for the basis of, yeah, we can say that this is probably, we have a sense it will end up being a better ratio in the end, based on these other pieces of information. I also think, we haven't really talked about other benefits, but this is an area, this stream contributes the most phosphorus to Lake Carmi, and this is where it's a priority area for projects. And floodplain restoration is one of them.
Alaire?
Yeah, just given what Lauren was just expressing about the 30% design piece, and I earlier shared just like similar frustrations with like these steps that don't actually make sense for certain kinds of projects. Lauren, if you were to think of this as like a final design project, or Dean, how does that influence the all of the stuff.
I don't, if I can just jump in, I don't think it influences it much, because in my mind, this is very likely to be the one and only real design phase, or it'll be
Right.
that 90%, and there will be a consensus on
Yeah.
the part of Stacy or Stacy and Karen, that it's almost there, and so it'll get an ID for that final 10% in implementation. So I don't think that makes much difference. I guess other than pragmatically, that if there was a formal preliminary, then the number for the phosphorus estimate would be better. That's, kind of the difference.
Dan? Oh, you're muted, Dan.
There we go, unmute. Seems one of the problems here is if we do say fund something which seems to be way outside of the criterion we are given, I'm told to deal with, that sets a precedent. And so everybody that comes along after this and said, well, you did this one, why not ours? So that's one thing that you got to be aware of, I think. No, that's not the right one. There.
Dean, go ahead.
Yeah, Lauren asked a question earlier that maybe is worth, or it would be good to revisit, and that is like, what's the right stance? Ask for what seems like a low amount and have to come back, or ask for what will be enough. As this conversation has gone on, I've started to feel more and more that it's probably better to ask for a modest amount, and then you can always come back in. I know that that's you got the steps to take care of in order to do that, but that might help us avoid situations like this in the future. Yeah, just a thought.
Lauren?
Can I bill for that time in between when I'm doing all the work of getting the request for proposals in and getting a higher number? Can I retroactively bill for that? I would have no issue as long as I'm not, again, spending money I don't have.
So if I can respond, if I follow you, you're going to be spending that work under the first task award you get for the lesser amount. Is that right? I mean, yeah, is that right?
Yeah, just if now for one round of proposals, and then I ask for those proposers. It just sounds like a lot of money, but maybe it's negotiable.
That was really choppy, at least for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess at a high level, when you have the task award granted, if you're doing work that was included in the initial approved budget, then you can start billing, is what I would say.
I'm going to paraphrase Lauren and correct me if I'm wrong. I think Lauren's objection comes from if she then has to go back and ask for more money, that takes time that she did not put in that task proposal because she's going for the lower task proposal, hoping that Fitzgerald can do this for $8,000. So it's not going to be in that task order.
Yeah, I don't know that I've got a tool that cracks that particular nut.
I guess, can you hear me? Ugh.
Nope. Lauren, you were coming through right now, but now you're muted. Nope. Lauren says in the comments, with an increase in money for the engineer, could I add staff time in as well in the second request? So if she's having to come back and ask for more money for the engineer because it can't be done for the lower amount that she requested, can she also then add staff time in because it's going to cost more staff time to run those numbers and do all of that management?
Off the top of my head, I'd say I think so.
Ted?
Didn't we already go through an exercise where if we need to amend the budget, we can do so, where the WIC has, like, if it's in 10% of what you request, you know, you can unanimously say, yep, you can take that 10%. If it's higher than, say, that, then it goes to the WIC chair and the vice chair. And then if it's substantially more, then we have to have a complete council vote on that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's the direction all the WICs have been going, to allow for some of these flexibilities if you do come in under budget or unforeseen circumstances.
Yes. Yeah. That is possible, but I don't think that's Lauren's issue. I think Lauren's issue is, like, let's say if there was a construction project, and I'm going to use a real life example from yesterday afternoon, which was a meeting held concerning a request for additional funds for construction of a project in the town of Georgia, in Basin 5. And what had happened was that a sponsoring organization had an approved project. They had a design consultant who was going to be doing the construction management, and then the construction bids came in high, and so they had to come back for more money. And one of the questions I asked was, well, is the construction management, is the designer who's going to be overseeing the work going to need any more money? And the answer was no, they're locked in. And I'm just bringing this up because, like with a lot of project types, maybe not necessarily water types, but road types, transportation types, there's a percentage relationship between construction costs and the other things that go along with it. And so, at least in my mind, that if the design costs, which are going to be a big chunk of this, are going up, then yeah, by necessity, there's a very high likelihood that other costs that are not just the designer's costs, but other things that are needed to support the designer, they're probably going to go up too. So again, when Lauren asked her question, could she ask for more time for staff? My initial off the head reaction is, yeah, I don't see a problem with that, because if there's more design work that's needed, there's probably more staff support work that's needed. And so I think that's the answer she is hoping to hear. And I think it's separate from this question of, like, what's the process that we're going to use to give the approval for it? Because that's really just a question of how big is the request. That's a separate issue. And we've taken care of that to a point with this simplified process for amendment.
So, shall I submit an updated application to Dean for $20,000? And once I do that, I guess, can we proactively approve that, Dean? So I don't need to wait 2 months?
I think that the Basin Council has the discretion, if someone was inclined to make a motion to direct $20,000 of funding for your project, you know, on the condition that you're going to submit an updated budget that is built around that amount, that motion could be approved and you wouldn't have to come back. Unless, then you get things in motion and then you have to, amend and, but working with things like if you got no responses that you could cover with $20,000, then we have to figure out, well, is it something that could be approved administratively or with the chair, vice chair, and so on. But yeah, I don't think you would have to come back to get another vote because the BWQ is voting the funds for the project.
Hello.
I mean, if we can do that now, like I'd love to make a motion to approve $20,000 for this project on the condition that Lauren resubmits a budget within that amount.
Kent?
I'd like to do a little discussion about the 20,000. I'm not sure that that's adequate. Our organization has had one project that was turned down by a really strict formula that was put in by another district or another council that is treating this discussion in a whole different manner, and that I don't agree with. I agree with the way we're doing things today. We're being open. We're having a good discussion today. We're going to come up with our own decisions, but I think we need to have enough information to adequately address what we're saying here. And I think I'd like to know how much more time Lauren is going to put into this. I'd sure like to know more about how those phosphorus calculations come up, and if there's more time that needs to be spent with that to get, because that's the other side of this. With this cost effectiveness, it's based on the phosphorus part too. And so if that part also needs to be addressed, I'm wondering if we actually need to be providing more money or more staff time to do that part of the investigation into this. It's part of a learning process. Even though we've been at it for going on to 3 years now, it's still a learning process. And I think we need to invest in this learning process. So I don't want to be pushing her down or holding under. I've got complete trust that they're going to do a really good job on this, a thoughtful job on this, and probably will come in under budget. But I don't want to limit her in any way. So that would be my suggestion, is that we actually up that limit from 20 to 25.
Hello.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we started throwing around 20 without, I'd like to hear from Lauren if that makes sense. I mean, my thought with this was that the only piece of the revised budget that would be different would be the contractor cost, the engineering cost. Like all of your staff time would be intact. It's the same project, requires the same amount of dedication from the staff, but just like working with engineers in either the lower cost people or in a different way would reduce that amount. So I would be happy to like modify that to 25, Kent, but that also just feels like sort of another number. So I'd love to hear from Lauren about like what would make sense for you.
Lauren.
Yeah. So just thinking through this a bit, we had a little less than 5,000 for staff management for staff time. And then thinking if Evan's preliminary bid was around $8,000, now we're at 13. And I am actually noticing, unfortunately, we didn't include the historic cost in our first budget. And so there's another $6,000, $2,000 to $6,000. That gets you between 15 and 20. And then let's say in the 2 months between when Evan posed to when we actually contract, he goes up 10%. I think 25 should be good if Evan can do the work. And I guess part of that point that I would like to toss out for future discussion, maybe not today, but are those cost effectiveness numbers including how much it costs to pay for the historic piece? Because every project is a new project and it's not a per acre thing. It's not a per kilogram thing. It's a per project thing. So I guess 25 seems like a reasonable starting point on my end based on what we know today. And if Evan doesn't want the project, you'll hear from me again.
Short answer is this old cost didn't include cultural resources.
All right. So we have, I guess, Alaire, would you mind voicing your motion with the new number?
Oh yeah, sorry, I don't need to raise my hand. Yeah, I will revise my motion, approve up to $25,000 for Lauren and Franklin County North Natural Resource Conservation District to do design on the Wood Addition project.
Is there a second for that motion? Is a second from Ted? Is there any more discussion?
I'll just note that I am abstaining from any future vote.
So we have a motion, we have a second, we have an abstention. Are there any other abstentions? Lauren has abstained. All in favor of passing this motion to earmark up to 25,000 for this project, please indicate by raising your hand digitally or otherwise. We've got Kent, Ted, Lindsay, Sarah, Barry, Alaire, and Lauren's abstention. That's all our voting members. Motion passes. Thanks for a varied and very good discussion. I think mostly what we got out of that was more things to discuss down the line, but that was great. I am going to try to get us back onto the agenda because we have some other heavy items as well. Dean, landowner agreements.
Yes. People can hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. I realize you just got through a really great discussion. Do people need a stretch break, or is everybody okay? Or I guess if you need to get up, then get up, move around, and we'll just try to keep track to make sure that we have at least 5 of you here to keep the quorum. This topic, operation and maintenance, is something that there's really a couple of related items, and I just don't need to spend too much time talking about this, but it felt important to bring it up. We've had some conversations about O&M before, but I just wanted to reinforce some things because at least in another basin, the other basin that we cover, it wasn't as smooth as it might have been, but just reinforcing the message that there's a new site access agreement that comes into play when QUISP funds are directed to a project. And the reason is that the DEC expects the clean water service providers to be able to guarantee that the project will be maintained, and DEC also expects that there will be a means to verify the condition of the project. So this is it's kind of important stuff. I know a lot of work was done to create this new document, but I also know that there are some people who are feeling like it would be great if that document could change and become a little bit friendlier. There's a link in the packets, and that's on this slide here, to the page where you can get that. And again, it's important to know that you are using the new model. It's actually got a combined, it's got a cover page and an agreement page that we're supposed to use. So just be careful which one. If you have any questions, just the key features of it: contact information, project details, the grant of access, term that's based on the life of the project, notification when the property is sold, or if the property is sold. This is not an easement. There are some people that I've heard say that they kind of think it's like a version of an easement. Well, no, unless the project is, I think, over $250,000, there's not an easement requirement, although it is important to keep in mind that for a project that does exceed that threshold, then we're talking about an entirely new level of agreement, and that in fact is an easement. This is just a kind of refresher There are people from DEC who could come in and give extensive presentations on it if you felt like it was necessary. There are also some training materials online. But I think that that's all I'm gonna say about this for now, unless there are questions. I don't see any hands up. And the related issue, since this is kind of like an intro to a topic for training purposes, is that we know that DEC is interested in maybe I can mute Karen here.
Yeah. Thank
I
you.
got that taken care of. Sorry about that. Is that DEC is making it known that they're interested in hearing about possible training topics. So I did include some materials in the packet, and I think you could spend a few minutes identifying any particular training items. Apologies to those of you who also serve on the Lamoille. This is something that you may be same thing that we talked about in the Lamoille Basin. But if there are any specific training topics, and maybe it's more like using Lauren's application as an example, maybe it's more training on FFI tool, or maybe there's like a quick back of the envelope approximation or something that's related to FFI tool. There are supposed to be some improvements to FFI tool created, and I don't know if that's going to make it easier to use, but anyway, that's just one example. I've included some potential topic areas, but I'm seeing Karen's hand and I'm seeing Lauren's hand, but I'll let you facilitate things here. And I see Ted's hand. So Lindsay, I will let you facilitate from here.
Go ahead, Karen. Nope, Karen, you're muted.
Regarding trainings, the other question that might be part of that is, would you prefer that there was a resource to help you obtain that information? Not just that there's a training, but there might be a person that you could go to that would basically provide that information. So you need the information, but you don't want to have to figure it out.
Lauren?
I'm just going to say, if you want to copy and paste everything I said at the Lamoille quick meeting, so I don't spend more time on that here, I think that would be applicable here as well.
Okay,
I can do that. I can do that because I summarized it.
Ted?
Gave it to my people. So yeah, I'll
FI tool. We don't have it for the Memphremagog. And I've been told by many people in DC to continue to use the calculator rather than the actual tool itself. Is that different now going towards Lake Champlain? Are people still being encouraged to use the tool in the Missisquoi or the calculator? Like to get some clarification on that. I've heard two different things now.
Dean?
What I would share is that I was in a meeting, Stacy was there. Based on things I had heard before that meeting, I said, I'm getting the sense that there are some partner organizations that don't want to use the FFI tool because of it's in the process of being updated, or it may not be the tool to use. And the response I got from Stacy was, use the tool. They should not be discouraged from using the tool. So that's what I can offer that I heard from Stacy, in connection with this question of use the tool or not.
Okay, I'll use the tool, and I will use the calculator too to see what that looks like.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I can. One of the things that Cliff, and I don't mean to put him on the spot, but I believe one of the things that he's going to be asked to delve into a bit is the FFI tool. And so in his process of beginning to get his bearings, he may be, I might ask you, Cliff to just confirm some of this stuff with the people at DEC. And report back.
Bridget? Bridget, you're muted.
Okay, I was just reading through Lauren's, the summary that Karen put in that came from the Lamoille meeting. I would agree about being in this realm for a year now. It's really hard to find what you need to put all this stuff together. And so Karen talking about a person to go to or a solid place on the website where I can find these things and put them together. I see number 2 there is more webinar trainings. I'd like them to be regular, right? So it can't just happen one year and then have us try to find the recording somewhere, because you don't have anybody to ask questions to. So almost an annual webinar for certain topics would be incredibly helpful, and a person to go to, so that you do have that opportunity to have those discussions and ask questions. It's really hard to find the time to look at a recording, and then you don't know where to go when you have follow-up questions.
Is everyone able to read in the chat, or should I read out what that summary from Karen? I guess I'll raise hand if you want me to read it out. Okay. Anyone else have discussion points they want to bring up?
I may. Based on the conversations today, some clarity of like the cost effectiveness ratios we should be providing to consultants in advance. It sounds like that's where people want to move.
Dean?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it was the cost effectiveness ratio that was being provided to the consultants. It was, I thought, what people, and Alara can speak for herself, but it was the idea that no, this project should cost around $20,000. So don't shy away from saying this is what the budget is. I mean, maybe yes, you could also provide the ratios and the phosphorus estimates, but I don't know if I'd heard that was the specific. Yeah, that was a specific piece of information, but yeah, I'll defer to.
I guess aren't those two things the same? Like the budget is determined by the cost effectiveness ratio based on the phosphorus calculation. I feel like that's the exact conversation we just had.
Well, it's in a sense and I've referred to them as benchmarks or reference points. I mean, yes, we could live in a world where those old fuzzy numbers just become the basis for everything. But I don't know that I was hearing or interpreting what I heard today as that's how we would use those numbers. If someone's got a, if you go out to Fitzgerald and they say it's going to cost $8,000 or $9,000 to do this design, and people like Alaire say, yeah, that's right, what it should cost. That to me sounds like the best determination of what the budget should be. I mean, what that specific cost should be. I'm sorry, what that cost should be. And yeah, you'll know whether or not it's going to be a much smaller number or close to the reference number or much higher. I mean, what we had so far today is that it's much higher. Now, if you had worked backwards from the cost effectiveness numbers, then I don't know. Would you have submitted an application? Maybe you would have, maybe you wouldn't have.
So I guess I'll reframe my request for training is let's have a training where we talk about how to use the cost effectiveness benchmarks in a useful manner so that projects will get approved and we're not wasting consultants' time asking them for cost opinions that we're never going to consider.
God, mute Karen.
Any other? Oh, Lauren. Can't hear
It
you.
feels like,
Oh, there you go.
oh, great, you heard that. I guess I'm just trying to reduce wasted work is my goal here.
Yeah, on everybody's part, not just ours, but also on the consultants.
And I guess, sorry, I'm just going to be annoying today. One thing that I know, Dean, you've talked about before is like, what could the QUIS be doing to help us? And I think we've mentioned, could there be someone at the BWC or the QUIS who's doing the P estimates in a consistent fashion for every project for us at a pre-30% design phase? So we're comparing apples to apples. And I guess that would be a suggestion if we could like retain a consultant who just does that for us. So we know we're doing it at least in a consistent manner, whether or not it's the right manner.
That's a good suggestion. If I'm just giving my own opinion about it, and it's something that I think I've heard suggested in connection with the historic assessment piece as well, although I'm not sure exactly how it gets pulled off. But I think it's a suggestion that we should try to figure out doing something with.
Can I, this is a bit of a side discussion. So Dean, feel free to tell me we don't have time for this, but I feel like we're not getting the applications in that we expect to. And to be frank, I had a couple of projects that I was hoping to get in and did not have, well, partly did not have staff capacity to pull it off in the middle of summer, but also just didn't have the landowners lined up to get those applications in. I hope to be able to submit in January, but folks on the screen that are or have submitted proposals, what are the barriers to not getting the volume of projects that we are right now? Is it that we don't have time to do those P calculations? Is it that we don't have time at all? Or is it that we don't have the right kind of projects or something else? Ted?
Bandwidth. It's Sarah and I in this office. And I split between, a little bit of the Lamoille, a little bit of the Missisquoi, and a lot of the Memphremagog. So it comes down to bandwidth. I do have a couple of ones that are coming online, Lindsay, for the upper Missisquoi that we should probably talk about on a side conversation to see how we want to dole that out. But yeah, that's what it comes down to. The same discussion in the Memphremagog, like, there's 3 of us that are putting in applications. It's Memphremagog Watershed Association, the district, and Northwoods. So, it's all dependent on bandwidth, and increasing capacity funds isn't going to make them come any faster.
Hey, Alaire?
Yeah, I think it's just like things that I and others have said a couple of times today of just like right sizing. I mean, Lauren, what you just said, like not wanting to waste effort, like right sizing the amount of effort for the actual project that's going to happen. You know, some projects do not need preliminary design. I mean, like, yeah, this is like the 5th time I said this today. Some projects can just go right to, maybe they could go right to construction. I don't even know, like, if, like, are there, we shouldn't think about every single project like a small culvert replacement on a private road or a small wood addition project or something like that on the same level as like a dam removal, which is like a major thing and requires a whole level of coordination and like legitimately can take a couple of years to like line everything up. But like the idea of having to go through all of the, like, we just, if there was some sort of like guidance around like, we are figuring this out, like those of us here, like who are doing projects, we're figuring this out together. But like as new folks come in and we hire other people and that kind of thing, just like what's the appropriate way to think about like how much oxygen should this particular project be taking? Because it doesn't seem like a good use of anybody's time or money to be like over complicating like one stream crossing on a private road or something like that. I mean, it's not, we're not going to get work done. So just like guidance around that, because otherwise, like the way that this is structured is like, yes, you have to do preliminary design, then you do 60%, and like without sort of just like reality checks and experience, you like people, I think you do feel like you have to like do that or like really explain if you're not. And I love the idea of having someone or a consistent way to just get those phosphorus numbers, because obviously that's what this is all hinging on. So like we shouldn't be like just flailing around trying to get phosphorus numbers from all different people. Or like, I don't know, that doesn't actually seem like work we should even have to be doing. Like the phosphorus number should just be like there. Because that's like the public good, right? And then we are like doing the things that are going to meet that. So I agree, like that, getting a better handle on calculating those feels really important.
Bridget, before I call on you, can I just sort of interject a question for maybe Dean and Karen? Is in your guess, are we locked into this? Would DEC have any flexibility to not make us do 30%, 60%, 90%? Like, are we just grasping at straws when we say we want there to be projects we can just dive into? You know, it's a hard conversation to have with a landowner when we're talking about something. I'm like, yeah, maybe in 3 years we'll get this done. You know, it's just that nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to have that conversation, and it's almost a non-starter with landowners. So I don't know if there's any flexibility within the DEC model or within the QUISP model.
Yeah, no, let me answer that, because I think I certainly believe there is, because really what we're doing when we're looking at what the deliverables should be or what this phases should be is we're looking at what deliverables we'd expect for a project so that it would make sense. This is what we would want to get, so we would feel comfortable going to the next phase. And so what was developed by QUIP can be rethought using that idea that, all right, let's figure out how we can reduce the steps, because this project doesn't need the same deliverables. We don't need to know that, we don't need to look at the initial design because it's a tree planting. Actually, why don't you just say you're going to do a tree planting and fit within this buffer width and this whatever, and we're fine. Just go do it. Just tell us how much it's going to cost. So, and if you need money to then take some time to go, because the other part of it is where you need money. If you need some money to go to a landowner and ask them the width and length, then you need that. You could get you could get money for that phase for design. But maybe you already have.
Yeah, I mean that exists. We've been doing that for years for tree plantings, and that's great. And speaking as the MRBA, that's primarily what we've done until the last 7 or 8 years. So that's a comfortable model. But now it seems like anything outside of that box is got barriers.
Yeah, no, we can apply it to the other projects for the same reason.
I hope that we can. I mean, I love that answer. I'm just,
Yeah.
it seems like
so
we're
just
being encouraged to then put in a 30% design.
Yeah.
Or
No,
directly in some cases. So
yeah. So we've got to work at figuring out how to give you the guidance that would allow you to do that. And I'm actually taking all this information and then sending it on to our group, because we are working on identifying what the barriers are based on previous conversations, and you guys are just adding to it right now, which is great.
Great. Thanks, Karen. I hope that can move rapidly too, because we're getting a lot of pressure to do these projects, and I don't want to start a project that I have to get 30% design until I find out I didn't have to get 30% design. And Lauren just put in the chat a very good question of if we can get some guidance about what requires a licensed engineer versus not, because that would be a huge benefit to have that kind of guidance.
Yeah.
Bridget.
Okay, I'm fervently writing down all these things. Okay, so I'm gonna riff off of all of you who have much more experience and just say same, especially the comment about the calculator piece. I think that's something that holds us up a lot in our discussions, even with our project committee, right? Because it's a kind of threshold that's been put out there, and so we kind of stumble over ourselves with projects because we're already trying to sort them in our heads without even really knowing which tool to use and then how to use it properly. Capacity is big for us at Friends of Northern Lake Champlain as well. We have a new project manager coming in on Friday, and I am trying to figure out how to train that person and give them all the things that they need as they come into this work. And I've gotten a lot of support for some of you in this conversation, so I really appreciate that. But moving forward, right, it'll still be what is our capacity and how many projects can we take on? And then the last piece for us, because we are finally pulling on full-time staff for the first time in about 6 years, is that training piece again. And things change so often I think about the VDHP review and trying to remember to include that in the steps that we need because it is such a new thing. So how do we keep up with training as well as things change and shift, including some of the things that we're talking about today? Thanks.
Ted, did you get your opportunity is that what you put in the chat, what you had your hand raised about?
Yeah, I don't need to belabor it. It's a side conversation. But we're going to put it. But we're going to put it to practice.
Right.
Other thoughts? We're getting down. We have about 16 minutes left in the meeting time, and I have a couple more topics, but I don't want to cut this one short if folks have other things they want to discuss.
Can I add that in terms of training, I'm happy when you have a new person like Bridget, just to put a meeting together and I can go through stuff with them as well. Because I used to do a lot more training of new people. Or at some organizations, I've always used me to help train new people. And so I'm still happy to do that work. And it's usually an hour or 2 hour conversation, but it's always fun because I get to know people too.
Dean, I saw you come off mute. Did you want to say something? And then I'll call on Lauren. Oh, Lauren, go ahead.
Karen, I just want to say thank you for that offer, and a 1 to 2 hour training is certainly not sufficient, and would love to just have a place where we can go where there's up-to-date resources online too. Yeah. So both are wonderful. Thank you.
Any final thoughts on this topic? Okay. On to the next. Dean, take it away.
Well, as I said, and thanks everybody for that great discussion and all the comments, which we'll have summarized in the meeting notes and possibly in an addendum. I had mentioned earlier in the meeting the news that DEC, through an updating of one of the guidance documents or the chapter in guidance document having to do with procurement, that things will hopefully get a little bit simpler. So I just wanted to touch base on this. It's chapter 3 of guidance that contains this. Um, they're looking at a couple of changes. One affects clean water service providers, but the big one is what we had talked about earlier, and I may not need to say much more, but the proposed guidance would make it so that you do not have to, as a matter of guidance, solicit 3 proposals. That's
We lost Dean.
sorry. What did you say?
I'm not sure. I think Ted, did you cut out for Ted? I was still hearing you.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. Yeah, so that's it. There is a component of this proposal that would also apply to clean water service providers, but it's essentially a cap, and that's $25,000 where we could do a sole source process. There's a rationale that DEC, or a couple of rationales DEC has given. At least one of them doesn't really make much sense, but I don't know that I need to worry about that, because the end result is that the proposal would say that the subawardees, that's you folks who the clean water service provider signs a task order with, could use your own procurement policy. So as I said earlier, if your procurement policies say you must get 3 bids, well, then you're going to want to change those. That's it. Were there any questions about it? It's something that I don't have an estimate of how long it's going to take, but I'm going to double check with my contact at DEC to see whether or not that's actually been formalized and put out for public notice, and that'll start a clock running for when this change can actually take effect. But it's good news. We don't get enough of it, but there's a little bit of good news. No questions or anything? And if not, since we're getting up within 10 minutes, is that okay, Lindsay? Okay, so I had wanted to just give some updates on a few things. Those are this updated or expedited funding process that we have created, the call for proposals to get project development funds. It's out. It's going to remain open. We kind of arbitrarily said the deadline is December 31st of this year, but it's going to be extended, and you don't have to wait for the deadline. It's essentially an ongoing solicitation. We are investigating, and we have created a simple form. Hopefully, if you have checked it out, you say, yep, it is pretty darn simple. We are looking at the question of getting watershed project IDs for certain kind of category type projects, and that's something that I've had some email correspondence with Karen about, and another person in the DEC world, and we have to follow up with a meeting on that. And so this is just another reminder, Karen, that we have to follow up with her to see whether or not she's ready to schedule a meeting. And we've also created a tool. One of the things I've sensed is that it's a challenge for people to come up with a description sometimes. So we've created something that will hopefully help with that. And I can talk with people about how that tool works. So anyway, if project development funding could help, I realize that a lot of the conversation we had earlier, if we had a way to provide capacity funding, you know, it might have started to address some of those things. I'm not sure if it's the wrong tool. Well, it is the wrong tool for the job, but it's an analogous tool. Your ability to come to the clean water service provider to get doses of funds for project development. Maybe if people are able to utilize that funding more, it'll help or ease some of these applications that are coming in for preliminary design. Knock on wood, maybe naive, maybe not the right thing. I also wanted to talk a little bit briefly about invoicing. I was encouraged by people in my shop who do financial things that we are now past the end of the quarter. We are reminding people that we've asked in the master agreements to provide reports quarterly and invoices. You may not have invoices to submit, but if you could submit just a very, very, very brief status report, that would be great. If you do have invoices and you can submit them, we can probably process them through October 15th. And I see Lauren's hand. So I'll stop and just see what that question is.
Yeah, Dean, I'm wondering if you can just email folks with projects with you with the template you'd like them to use for the quarterly reports every quarter.
Yeah,
as a reminder.
I have a to-do list from the Lamoille meeting, and I think that sending you that template, but the idea of having it go out to everybody, yeah, hold on just a sec while I make sure that that's. Yeah, so we're doing more and more things online, and I guess one of the things will be that yes, we could have an automated system that's gonna a system generated email that's gonna say yes, it's that time of the year, and here are the documents that may, or here are links to documents that could be useful. And one of the things that we would include as a link is a tool. It's kind of a survey or interactive questionnaire that will be particularly useful at the end of the fiscal year. So when you're preparing your invoices in July, next July for this current state fiscal year, it's going to be helpful so that we avoid some of the difficulties that we had with invoice processing this last year. But yeah, it'll be system generated, Lauren, but I don't think people will care as long as that they get that reminder. So that's the request related to invoicing. And I'm also updating this group. I updated the Lamoille folks about the participation plan. And so some of you have heard this before. There was a draft that came out in August. There was a call for public comments. Some of you provided comments. It was my understanding that I knew that the executive committee of the Regional Planning Commission was going to discuss that at their meeting in September, and I had been given the impression that it was going to go from the executive committee to the full commission for a vote in September, but it's not happening that fast. There's going to be continued discussion of this public participation document that will, and I need to just go into the weeds a little bit, and that is to say, this is a document that the Regional Planning Commission asked the Regional Planning Commission asked the Basin Council to just hit pause for a bit on your own work related to public participation, because they think, the Regional Planning Commission thinks, that this is an important point of reference. I want to make it really clear that the Regional Planning Commission is not writing a public participation document for the BWQ. And so if people thought it was going to be that, that's not what it is. But it is something that to recap, Catherine Dimitrick, as the director of the Regional Planning Commission, had asked the Basin Council to wait before the Basin Council considered doing more work on its own public participation plan. But this is a lot of blah, 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 blah. But anyway, I had promised to give an update. That's the latest. And if you would like to know more, please let me know. I was going to let Lindsay call you, Lauren.
Yeah, I was, yeah. I was trying to debate if I should type in there. Is that document just the cover page?
Oh, is it? Oh,
Yeah.
no, it should be the whole thing.
Okay. That didn't open up correctly when I hit the link, but go ahead, Lauren.
Oh, I apologize. I just wouldn't be me if I didn't say we need a public participation plan for the WIC to develop more project managers. And that's all I'll say.
And I'll let you know, Lauren, that I have mentioned that. So it's known to the Regional Planning Commission. I'm not sure that it's something that would be the outcome of a public participation plan, but I'm acknowledging the comment, and I've heard you say it. Yeah, so I'm aware. And it's the Regional Planning Commission.
Yes, Dean, though, to that point, is there anything stopping the BWIC from creating a public participation plan for the NRPC does? Because that was the original plan. That is a charge of our council. And I think I actually, on this particular piece, I do think I speak for everyone in that we need more project managers.
Yeah, so the requirement for the Basin Council as a policy, what I think might have been the reaction to the document that came from the committee was that it was going beyond a policy to something that's a plan. Now, the Basin Council could do a public participation plan, but I'm just laying out that the requirement that the Basin Council has to meet is a policy. I'll give an unvarnished opinion, and that is that the idea of a public participation plan being the mechanism for identifying project managers, that sounds not like the same thing, but that's maybe me not understanding how you are making the connection between the public participation piece and getting the funding for people who I'm guessing would be in organizations working as project managers, which, sorry, it just sounds an awful lot like the thing we've heard for a long time, and that's the capacity issue. But maybe we can talk about it some more.
Lauren?
Yeah, can I add that I'd like to talk about that in terms of, how do we let people know that this is it could be a great way to add a new opportunity for project support.
Are you saying a public participation plan, Karen?
Well, let's just start with the basic need and then see it's going to be some sort of communication plan. We're going to have to have a framework. What's the messaging? Who's going to contact whom? Or do we put, so it's not just about saying, okay, now we have a lot of money for everyone. That obviously brings people, but there might be groups that, anyway, I should leave it at that. I agree with with Lauren, and let's just put it out as a larger question. And how do we answer it?
Maybe that goes on the future meeting topics, Dean. Lauren?
That point, in theory, everyone who's sitting on the BWIC should be able to bring projects forward, even the folks that are in the room. And I don't know that everyone in the room even feels comfortable doing that. In particular, I would love to support towns to bring their own projects forward too. I think that was a goal of the QUISPs.
Yeah.
Sounds I'm sorry. I was
Go
just
ahead,
going to say, sounds to me like we'll make the public participation document, whatever we want to call it, an issue for the next agenda item in the next meeting.
Alaire has to jump off. Actually, all of us, I think, have a meeting. But she just put in the chat, we do need a quorum. So if we can have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
And a second. I've got Barry seconding. All in favor?
Aye.
Got Lindsay, Kent, Lauren, Dan, Alaire. Got a quorum. Thanks, guys. Meeting adjourned.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody. Thanks.
Have a great afternoon.
You too.
Appreciate your time.